For my Philippine dreams, and welcome to another Week in the Philippines update. This one is for October 24th, 2016, and we got some interesting things to talk about. Before I get into that though, I'd like to recommend to everybody, whether you've never been to the Philippines or whether you live in the Philippines now, to go over, there's a link down in the video description box, to go over to the Project Gutenberg site and get the free ebook that was written by Paul Gilbert at the turn of the 20th century, recounting his experiences. I believe he was teaching in Mindanao. He was actually in Dumaguete for a little while. But it's an excellent book. It's very well written, and even though it was written, over 100 years ago, it's still very contemporary with the language and everything. The guy was a great writer. As a matter of fact, I think he did some big kids series over in the UK. So get that book, read that book. It's fantastic. It's free, and what's really interesting reading the book is seeing how the Philippines got to where it is today, because a lot of things haven't changed in over 116 years. Paul Gilbert was actually one of the original, what they call the Thomasites, because when the first steamer, the first ship that came from the United States, full of teachers, engineers, all that stuff, was the USS Thomas. So they call all the people that came over on that first boat the Thomasites, and he was one of the original Thomasites. I think he was here for about 5 years, and he's got some really interesting stories. So that book is free. It's a great resource. It's a great read. It's available in EPUB, Mobi, all those different formats, so you can check it out. All right. So I've been getting a lot. All right. First personal update. I did not go to Apo Island or Siquijor. Michelle went with her sister and one of her friends over the weekend. I was supposed to go to Apo on Sunday, yesterday, but I wasn't feeling that hot. I wasn't feeling that hot the night before, and I wasn't feeling any better the next morning, so I did not go. So I'm kind of disappointed. Actually, around 1:30 in the afternoon, I was feeling better, and I was like, man, I wish I had gone. All right, so first off, let's get into the news. And usually I cover 3 topics. This time we're going to be covering 1 topic, and it has to do with President Duterte's keynote speech that he gave during a trade delegation to China. And as to be expected, President Duterte did not disappoint, and he came out with some pretty interesting stuff, and we're going to go over that. First off, let me say that again, this isn't my opinion. I'm not going to cast judgment. It's not my place as a visitor, as a foreigner living in the Philippines, to cast judgment on what's going on here. I am not a citizen, so I'm just going to be recounting the facts. But I trust that all of our viewers are old enough and mature enough to come to their own conclusions as to these facts. So let's get right into the topic at hand. As we noted in our live broadcast last time, President Duterte made a trip to China this week, bringing with him a delegation of 250 Filipino businessmen looking to network with their Chinese business partners. Early reports are good. I guess they've reported that China has already agreed to billions of dollars worth of investments in the Philippines, having to do with road construction, infrastructure, business, BPOs, outsourcing, and all that stuff. Keep in mind, though, that these don't appear to be grants. It's not like, during Typhoon Haiyan, Yolanda, when all the countries gave all that money to the Philippines for disaster relief. It looks like these are loans. So you got to keep that in mind. The hot topic of the Spratly Islands also got some attention, and both parties agreed to diplomatically work on the situation without heated language used in the past. And that's coming. President Duterte gave a few speeches while in China. This past Thursday, during his keynote speech to the Trade Forum, he made a few fairly direct swipes at Americans, casting them as, quote, loud and discourteous, while at the same time describing Filipinos and other Asians as a very polite people and fundamentally shy. The president then went on to say that Americans are, quote, a little bit loud, sometimes rowdy, and they have this volume of their voice, and the larynx is not well adjusted to civility. The problem when you talk to the Westerners, Americans and all, they are a very discourteous people, end of quote. Echoing his earlier reference of a separation of ties with the United States, President Duterte went on to say that U.S. mining interests in the Philippines harm the environment and warned Chinese businessmen not to make deals with Americans, saying, quote, if you do that, that is the shortest way of losing your money, end of quote. The president then went on to relate a personal anecdote having to do with, quote, American idiotic arrogance, end of quote. During a stop at Los Angeles International after a visit to Brazil, President Duterte, I think he was a congressman or mayor back then, stated that he had been questioned by a black security officer while he was unable to show a travel authorization document. Quote, "You know, this guy brought me into a room to interrogate me. So I said, if you detain me any further and if there's a plane available going back to the Philippines now, I'd be happy to ride. That was the last time I went to America." Then he goes on, "Maybe sometime soon the Americans come to my country for business and all, including pedophilia. And they come to my country sans a visa. They do not need it. They go there as if they own the place, maybe thinking that it was only until now. And Filipinos who go to America and who have the money, they are just not only berated in the visa control in the United States he's talking about, in the consular office, they are humiliated. And so maybe, is there American here? If you are planning to go to my country, you get a visa from where you came from. Maybe," and there was some applause, "it's about time. If you think they're liberal with the Filipinos, it's because they have the brains and you've got the best and brightest of the Filipinos for your country." Then he went on to criticize the United States for atrocities committed by American troops during the early years of the American operations during the Philippine-American War, citing the 1901 Samar Massacre, where the American General Jacob Smith ordered the killing of Filipinos under age of 10, and the 1909 Budajao Massacre, this is down in Mindanao, in which hundreds of Muslim Moro tribesmen were killed by U.S. forces on the Sulu Peninsula and Mindanao, among them women and children. This hasn't been the first time the Philippines president has recounted those terrible happenings from the Philippine-American War. All right, so he's got a really important point here. The Philippine-American War at the turn of the century was very brutal and it was very bloody. Most of the soldiers, the vast majority of the soldiers coming over from the United States to the Philippines were from the Indian Wars. They had been, dealing with the atrocities there and the brutal warfare out in the West and subjugating the Indians. So they were a pretty brutal bunch. And there are no set statistics as to how many Filipinos died during the Philippine-American War, but the numbers are in the hundreds of thousands at least, and they might be as much as up to 1.2, 1.4 million. Keep in mind that a lot of these deaths by the Filipinos during the American occupation weren't actually being shot or cannoned or whatever they were doing. What happened was the Americans set up these horrible internment camps, which are basically concentration camps, and there was horrible cholera outbreaks. And we just saw this recently. Cholera, it only happens, with fecal matter in the water, and people start drinking that, and it gets communicated that way. And we've most recently saw it in Haiti after the horrible hurricane down there, and all the infrastructure was basically destroyed again. So they're dealing with a cholera outbreak. So the vast majority of these deaths during the American occupation were actually by disease, cholera, after the Americans forced them into internment camps. General Jacob Smith is quoted as saying, and I've mentioned this before, "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. The interior of Samar must be made a howling wilderness." Basically what happened was he got court-martialed when he returned to the United States for these atrocities, for making these orders. He denied it at first, but then they brought up a bunch of officers who said, yeah, he did say that, kill anybody over the age of 10 that's capable of bearing arms. And he got found guilty, but he was like reprimanded or something. He didn't do any time, he wasn't locked up, and eventually later on he died right before the First World War. And he had volunteered to go back to active duty, but they didn't want him because he had been disgraced. Finally, billions of dollars pour into the Philippines every year from OFWs in the United States, and there is a long history of trust and mutual aid between the two nations. Despite this, however, the president's rhetoric will actually how the president's rhetoric will actually pan out remains to be seen, especially when it comes to repercussions falling on foreigners living, working, studying, or retiring in the Philippines. Being an optimist, because you got to be an optimist, I am hoping that it'll all work out. Also being a realist, however, one has to prepare for any eventuality. Forewarned, being forearmed, and all of that. Always have an exit plan. And if you go to our site, and there's a link down to the site, to the blog article that I just basically read, there's a link to the full keynote speech at the trade delegation up in China, and I believe it's on Philstar, and you can check it out there. There's been a lot of questions, and I've been getting all kinds of messages and people asking me my opinion on what's going on. I'm not sure. We have to wait and see. This is the part where everybody has to wait and to see how this is actually going to pan out. President Duterte obviously has issues with the United States. He's going back in history to the Philippine-American War 116 years ago to talk about some of those issues that he has. He also has personal issues with the United States now because he had that problem when he went to the United States and he got accosted by that black officer, quote unquote, that was asking about some missing travel documents that he had. And he's also still upset about President Obama questioning the salvage, the salvaje, the extrajudicial killings that have been occurring ever since he became president. So as foreigners, as expats, we just got to wait and see what's going to happen. I'm not sure. I have an exit plan. I've already told you what I'm going to do. And we just got to, stay in touch with what's going on. I like living in the Philippines. I like Filipinos. I think the culture is pretty interesting. Not too crazy about the food. But overall, I really enjoy living here. So I'm hoping it's all going to work out. And what's interesting also is when he's making these statements, he has this guy, I think it's one of the ambassadors to the U.S. or something, who comes in the next day and basically tries to cover over and explain what the president was actually saying and to say, no, we're not actually separating from the United States. We're just looking to, different countries, China and Russia, to have relationships with. Because, and it makes sense, China and the Philippines are right next to each other. They share territorial waters, and there's that issue with the Spratlys that's got to be worked out. So, he's playing the field, he's doing whatever, and we just have to wait and see what's going to happen. All right, so let's go check out if there's any comments. This was an unannounced live cast. And let's see, we got some comments. All right, so that's basically the live cast. Like I said, you can go over to, down in the video description box, you can check out the article that I wrote. Also, make sure you read the book that Paul Gilbert wrote in I believe it was published 1905, about his experiences teaching in the Philippines. And as you're reading it, just try to keep in mind, okay, what's changed and what hasn't changed. And you're going to see a lot of stuff that actually hasn't changed, which is pretty interesting. So let's go to the comments. Jerry, how you doing? Noob, Hannah, Scott. Hey, Scott, how's it in Hawaii? I checked the temperature in Hilo about an hour ago. I think you're in Hawaii, and it was 73 degrees in Hilo, and it's 7 p.m. there or something. Fuck a Duck says, I just wanted to let you know the other day I was in a Target store in Bakersfield, California, and I seen your twin. Man, he must have been a handsome individual. Okay, so Gnarless Rocks is saying, yeah, low interest, 13.5 billion loans to the Philippines. Okay, so those are loans. And that's a lot of money. Is that USD? I think that's USD. That's a lot of money. Trevor still just jet lag, got back from the Philippines. I hope you enjoyed your stay. From CLA, did you watch the premiere of the new season of The Walking Dead? No, I haven't seen. Actually, I watched the first season, like the first couple episodes, and I thought it was horrible, so I didn't watch it again. I'm still finishing up Orange is the New Black, which I think is one of the best shows I've ever seen. I spent a lot of time working in prisons, and they really captured the ambiance and the environments. I mean, the set design, all that stuff. Jeff says, I heard he gave all the bases to China. I don't think that happened. All right, one thing we also have to keep in mind is if he really wants to get hardcore, and because he has to pass all this stuff. I mean, there's laws, there's trade agreements, there's all this stuff, military cooperation agreements. And if he really wants to dissolve all this stuff, it has to go through Congress. Basically, there's all this checks and balances. But if he really wanted to get hardcore, he could declare martial law, dissolve Congress, dissolve habeas corpus, where you can get arrested for anything, close the borders, close the banks, international bank transfers, all that stuff. So if he wanted to get hardcore, he could do that. Scott says 8:30 net and about 78 degrees. Ah, that's so nice. It's so much cooler there. Melly says, I've never been to Visayas Islands. Oh, Visayas are very nice. I like it. Everybody speaks Bisaya. You travel around and every place kind of looks the same. Walking By says, haha, that's so true. Duterte says things and you're like, WTF. Then the next day, the things he said have changed. Yeah. It's kind of like the relation. It reminds me of this. If you're not American, we got this guy Donald Trump running for president, and he sometimes comes out with these sometimes crazy comments, and the next day the vice presidential candidate, Mike Pence, I believe his name is, has to try to put lipstick on the pig that Trump created. So there's like that thing going on. As a matter of fact, I think the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines got some heat for describing it that way, the relationship between Duterte and I believe the other ambassador. President Duterte, I should say. All right, so that's about it this week in the Philippines. I got some other interesting stuff that I'll talk about in the live stream, but I just wanted to cover this one topic because I've been getting a lot of messages and stuff about it, and people are interested. We got to wait and see what happens. You never know what's going to happen. You got to have contingency plans. You got to have exit plans. But I have a feeling it's going to be okay. And if it gets too crazy, you know, I'm sure that they're going to let us leave, right? Right? Oh, man. Nothing worse than being in a Philippine detention center. All right. Hope you're all well. Make sure you like, dislike, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Until next time, this is Ned over at My Philippine Dreams. Take care, y'all. See you next time. And get the book. Read the book. It's really good. It's free. It's fantastic.